In the pantheon of role-playing games, few stories have captured the imagination and hearts of players quite like Final Fantasy VI. Released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, this masterpiece from Squaresoft represented the culmination of everything the series had learned about storytelling, character development, and the very nature of heroism itself. While it arrived in North America under the title Final Fantasy III, due to the skipped localizations of its predecessors, time has restored its proper place in the franchise's chronology, and with it, recognition as one of gaming's most profound narratives. What makes Final Fantasy VI so remarkable is not simply its technical achievements or its memorable soundtrack, though both deserve praise. Rather, it is the game's willingness to ask uncomfortable questions about the nature of existence, the price of hope, and what it truly means to find purpose in a world that seems determined to crush that very concept. This is a story that does something almost unheard of in the medium. It allows the villain to succeed. It watches as everything the heroes fought to protect crumbles into ash and ruin. And then, in the aftermath of that apocalypse, it asks its characters and its players alike whether there is still something worth fighting for when all seems lost. The world of Final Fantasy VI is one shaped by ancient conflict and modern ambition. Long before the events of the game, 3 gods descended from the heavens. These beings, known as the Warring Triad, feared one another's power so greatly that they began to war among themselves. The mortals caught in the crossfire of their divine conflict were transformed into beings called Espers, magical creatures forced to serve as soldiers in a war that was never theirs to fight. The devastation was immeasurable, the suffering incomprehensible. Entire civilizations were wiped from existence as the gods wielded their servants like weapons against one another. The gods realized too late the chaos their fighting was causing, the devastation their pride had wrought upon the world. In an act of collective remorse, they agreed to seal away their power. With the last dregs of their fading magic, they returned free will to the Espers before petrifying themselves into stone statues, hoping their eternal slumber would prevent further catastrophe. It was a noble gesture, but the damage had already been done. The world bore the scars of divine arrogance, and those scars would shape everything that followed. For a time, there was peace. Espers and humans lived side by side, sharing knowledge and building a civilization that benefited from both magical and mortal ingenuity. Cities rose that combined the mystical arts with human craftsmanship. Knowledge flowed freely between the two peoples, and it seemed as though a golden age had dawned. But human nature, as it so often does, turned toward greed. Seeing the power the Espers possessed, humans sought to claim that power for themselves. They discovered ways to infuse themselves with Esper magic, creating beings known as Magi, humans who could wield mystical forces beyond normal comprehension. What followed became known as the War of the Magi, a cataclysmic conflict that nearly destroyed the world itself. The war raged across continents with a fury that dwarfed even the conflict of the Warring Triad. Ancient kingdoms rose and fell in the span of seasons. The Esper Odin stood as a king defending his castle against overwhelming odds, ultimately petrified mid-battle, forever frozen as a monument to a forgotten age. The mighty Valigarmanda was sealed beneath ice and snow, buried so deeply that its very existence would fade into legend. Weapons of terrible power were created, including 2 entities known as the Ultima Weapons. One, a living monstrosity of pure destructive force. The other, a blade that drew its strength from the wielder's very life force. The battles were apocalyptic in scale, Entire mountain ranges were leveled, oceans boiled. The sky itself seemed to tear apart as Magi unleashed spells that reshaped the landscape. Cities that had stood for millennia were reduced to rubble in moments. Forests that had taken centuries to grow were incinerated in waves of magical fire. The Espers, betrayed by the very humans they had lived peacefully beside, fought with the desperation of a people facing extinction. The Magi, drunk on their stolen power, pushed ever harder, seeking total dominance. Neither side would yield, and the world paid the price for their stubbornness. When the flames of the War of the Magi finally receded, they left behind only the charred husk of a world. Magic itself seemed to vanish, relegated to myth and fairy tale. The survivors emerged from hiding to find a planet transformed beyond recognition. Where once stood great cities, now lay deserts of ash. Where forests had flourished, only dead stumps remained. The very air seemed poisoned, and the survivors struggled simply to find food and water. It was the end of an age, and those who lived through it could scarcely believe they had survived. The Espers, horrified by what the war had wrought and fearful of future human aggression, made a fateful decision. They created a realm of their own, a pocket dimension where they could live in peace, separated from the mortal world. They took with them the statues of the warring triad, ensuring that the source of so much devastation could never again be used to fuel human ambition. Behind them, they sealed a great gate, severing almost all connection between their world and ours. It was a divorce born of necessity and pain, the acknowledgement that humans and Espers could never again live side by side without bloodshed. The humans who had become Magi during the war found themselves persecuted and feared. They retreated to a remote village called Tamasa, where they lived in isolation, their magical heritage becoming a closely guarded secret passed down through generations, their powers slowly diminishing with each passing century. They became shadows of what they once were, their abilities fading like embers cooling to ash. The village itself seemed removed from time, a relic of an age the world had chosen to forget. 1,000 years would pass. The world rebuilt itself without magic, developing instead the technologies of iron, gunpowder, and steam. Great nations rose from the ashes of the old world, nations that viewed the stories of magic and Espers as nothing more than fairy tales told to children. Among them, the most powerful was the Gestahlian Empire, named for its emperor, a man whose ambitions would echo the mistakes of the ancient past. Emperor Gestahl was not content with merely ruling his nation. He dreamed of conquest, of bringing all the world under his banner, and he understood what historians had forgotten. Magic had once existed. The Espers were real, and somewhere, somehow, that power could be reclaimed. He set his scientists and scholars to work, and they made a breakthrough. They discovered that if Espers could be captured and their essence extracted through a process called magitech, that magical power could be artificially infused into humans and machines alike. It was a revelation that would reshape the world, though not in the way anyone hoped. The Empire began hunting Espers. Wherever they found them in the mortal world, they captured them, dragged them back to the capital city of Vector, and imprisoned them in the Magitech research facility. There, under the direction of Professor Chid del Norte Marguez, the Espers were subjected to experiments that drained their magical essence and transferred it into willing and unwilling recipients. The first human to undergo this process was a man named Kefka Palazzo, a court mage and general who volunteered for the procedure. But the process was imperfect, untested. While it succeeded in granting Kefka magical abilities, it also shattered his mind, transforming a loyal soldier into a nihilistic psychopath who delighted in cruelty and chaos. He laughed at suffering, found joy in destruction, and seemed to possess no capacity for empathy or remorse. The Empire had created a monster, but they did not yet realize the magnitude of their mistake. Undeterred by this failure, Professor Sid refined the process. His next subject was a young woman he had raised as his own daughter, a girl named Celes. The improved procedure granted Celes magical abilities without destroying her sanity, creating the first true Magatech Knight. She rose through the Empire's military ranks with startling speed, becoming a general while still young, a living weapon whose loyalty to the Empire seemed unshakable. She was everything Kefka was not: disciplined, honorable, capable of strategy and compassion. Yet she, too, was a product of the Empire's cruel experiments, a fact that would haunt her. The Empire continued to create more Magatech Knights and Magitech armor, mechanized suits that could channel magical energy, slowly building an army unlike anything the world had seen in a millennium. City after city fell before their advance. Kingdoms that had stood for centuries were conquered in weeks. The Empire's expansion seemed unstoppable, and Emperor Gestah's dream of world domination appeared within reach. But there were those who opposed the Empire's expansion. In the shadows, a resistance group called the Returners worked to undermine Imperial control, sabotaging operations, spreading information, and dreaming of a world where city-states could exist free from Gestah's rule. They were led by a man named Bannon, whose conviction that the Empire's use of magic would lead only to a second war of the Magi drove him to desperate measures. Among his agents was Edgar Ronnie Figaro, the young king of Figaro, who publicly maintained an alliance with the Empire while secretly funneling resources and intelligence to the Returners. It was a dangerous game, one that required Edgar to smile at men he despised and bow to a regime he worked to destroy. And it was into this powder keg of tension and conflict that a young woman would stumble, her memories stripped away, carrying within her a power that would change the course of history. The snow fell heavy on the mountains surrounding Narshe, an independent mining city that had remained neutral in the Empire's endless expansion. Through the white drifts came three figures in Magatech armor, their mechanized suits trudging through conditions that would have frozen an ordinary person solid. Two were Imperial soldiers, Biggs and Wedge, veterans who had seen their share of conquered territories. The third was different. Inside her armor sat a young woman with green hair, her eyes vacant and distant, a slave crown fixed to her head ensuring her obedience to Imperial commands. Her name was Terra Branford, though she did not remember it. She did not remember anything beyond the orders echoing in her mind. The Empire had learned of a frozen Esper discovered in the Narshe mines, and they had sent her to claim it. They descended into the depths of the mine, past abandoned tunnels and frozen equipment, following reports and rumors to the deepest chamber. There, encased in a pillar of ice, they found what they sought: Valigarmanda, one of the legendary Espers from the War of the Magi, preserved for 1,000 years in its frozen tomb. As they approached, something stirred. The Esper's power, dormant for so long, suddenly awakened. Pulses of magical energy erupted from the ice, raw and uncontrolled. Biggs and Wedge barely had time to scream before the energy consumed them, ripping through their Magitech armor like paper. The backlash struck Terra as well, destroying her armor and, crucially, shattering the slave crown that had bound her will. The sudden freedom was too much for her fractured mind. Terra collapsed into the snow, unconscious, her identity wiped clean by a year of magical enslavement. When she awoke, it was in the home of Arvis, a sympathetic resident of Narshe, who had found her and dragged her to safety before the city guards could capture her. He explained what he knew. She had been wearing a device called a slave crown, used by the Empire to control those with magical abilities. The Empire wanted her back, but now, free from their control, she had a choice. She could run, hide, try to disappear into the world, or she could seek answers about who she truly was. Before Terra could make that choice, the city guards found her. Narshe might be neutral, but they had no desire to provoke the Empire by harboring an escaped Imperial weapon. As soldiers closed in, ready to drag her back to Vector in chains, a voice called out from the shadows. A young man with auburn hair and a bandana, dressed in the practical clothes of a traveler, stepped between Terra and her pursuers. His name was Locke Cole, and he introduced himself with characteristic bravado as not a thief, but a treasure hunter. He had been sent by Arvis to help Terra escape, and with the assistance of 10 Mughals who lived in the mines, small furry creatures with bat wings and pom-poms atop their heads, they fought off the guards and made their way to the edge of the city. As they caught their breath in the cold mountain air, Terra's confusion poured out. She remembered nothing before waking in Arvis's home. No family, no childhood, no sense of who she had been before the Empire's slave crown stripped away her identity. Locke saw her distress and made a promise, one that would define much of what followed. He would protect her until her memory returned. He knew people who could help, people who opposed the Empire and understood what they did to those with magical abilities. They would travel south to Figaro Castle, where Locke had contacts who could keep Terra safe and perhaps help her remember who she truly was. The journey across the desert was largely quiet, Terra still processing her newfound freedom, Locke keeping watch for any sign of Imperial pursuit. Figaro Castle rose from the sand like a mirage, a technological marvel in the middle of nowhere, its walls gleaming in the desert sun. The castle's ruler, King Edgar Ronnie Figaro, greeted them personally. Edgar was everything a storybook king should be: handsome, charming, witty, and absolutely shameless in his flirtation with every woman he encountered. He made an immediate pass at Terra, much to Locke's annoyance, but beneath the womanizing exterior was a sharp political mind and a genuine commitment to opposing the Empire's tyranny. That night, as Terra settled into guest quarters, she learned from Locke that Edgar's alliance with the Empire was a facade. Figaro secretly supported the Returners, using its neutral status to gather intelligence and funnel resources to the Resistance. It was a dangerous game, one that required Edgar to smile and bow to Imperial inspectors while plotting their eventual downfall. And as if to punctuate that danger, the very next morning brought an unwelcome visitor. Kefka Palazzo arrived at Figaro's gates, his motley jester garb and painted face giving him the appearance of a deranged clown. He demanded that Edgar hand over Terra, claiming the Empire had a right to reclaim its property. Edgar played his role perfectly, feigning ignorance about Terra's presence, insisting he had seen no fugitives. Kefka was not fooled, but he also lacked proof. Frustrated and spiteful, he ordered his troops to burn Figaro Castle to the ground. As flames began to spread and Imperial soldiers swarmed the courtyard, Edgar revealed one of his kingdom's greatest secrets. Figaro Castle was not merely a fortress. It was a mobile one, capable of submerging beneath the desert sands and traveling underground. With the castle diving to safety, Edgar, Terra, and Locke escaped on chocobos, large flightless birds that served as the world's primary mounts, racing across the desert while Kefka's forces could only watch in impotent fury. They fled east through the mountain pass of Mount Koltz, a treacherous route that saw them ambushed by bandits and monsters. Near the summit, they encountered Vargas, a martial artist consumed by jealousy and rage. Vargas was the son of Duncan Harcourt, a legendary martial arts master, and he had grown to hate his father's favorite student, a man Vargas believed had stolen the recognition that should have been his. That student appeared just as Vargas prepared to strike a killing blow. Sabin René Figaro, Edgar's twin brother, intervened with devastating effect, his specialized combat techniques making short work of Vargas's rage. Sabin had left Figaro Castle 10 years prior, unable to stomach the politics and duty that came with potential rulership. He had spent the last decade training under Duncan, becoming a powerful martial artist dedicated to using his strength to protect others. The reunion between Edgar and Sabin was emotional but brief. There would be time for explanations later. For now, they had to reach the returners' hidden base before the Empire tracked them down. Deep in the mountains, concealed by geography and careful planning, they found the headquarters of the Resistance. There, they met Bannon, the returners' leader, an older man whose gentle demeanor belied his revolutionary convictions. Bannon explained to Terra what the Empire truly was, an imperialist machine consuming free nations one by one, using the power of Espers they had enslaved to fuel their conquest. He asked Terra to join the returners, to use whatever abilities she possessed to fight back against tyranny. Terra was hesitant. She knew nothing about herself, nothing about her past or her capabilities. How could she commit to a cause when she did not even know who she was? But before she could decide, word arrived that changed everything. The Empire had invaded South Figaro, a coastal town that served as a major trade hub. They were using it as a staging ground for a northward push, likely targeting the returners' base itself. Locke volunteered to infiltrate South Figaro and slow the Empire's advance from within, buying time for the others to evacuate. Terra, Edgar, Sabin, and Bannon would travel by raft down the Lethe River to Narshe, where the frozen Esper still remained, hoping to learn something about the nature of Espers and magic that might help them against the Empire. The river journey proved more eventful than anticipated. Ultros, a giant purple octopus with a theatrical personality and a grudge against anyone who crossed his path, attacked the raft. The battle was fierce, with the creature's tentacles threatening to capsize them at any moment. Sabin, in a moment of reckless bravery, leaped into the water to finish Ultros off. The current swept both of them away, separating Sabin from the group and washing him into an entirely different adventure. What followed was a moment of narrative innovation that would become one of Final Fantasy VI's defining features. The story split into 3 separate scenarios, allowing players to experience the perspectives of multiple characters as events unfolded simultaneously across different parts of the world. Each path offered its own challenges, its own revelations, and its own glimpse into the broader tapestry of the conflict engulfing the planet. Locke's infiltration of South Figaro was a tense affair of stolen uniforms and careful timing. The Empire had already occupied the town, soldiers patrolling the streets and questioning citizens about returner activities. Locke made his way through back alleys and secret passages, gathering intelligence about Imperial plans and sabotaging supplies where he could. In the basement of a mansion, he discovered an unexpected prisoner. Celes, the Empire's celebrated general and Magatech knight, was chained to a wall, accused of treason for questioning her orders. The man guarding her boasted of the reward he would receive for turning her over to the Empire, never imagining that this prisoner might be worth more as an ally. Locke's rescue of Celes was driven by multiple impulses. There was the practical consideration that an imperial general might possess valuable intelligence. There was his instinctive desire to protect anyone in danger, especially women, a compulsion rooted in a tragedy from his past that still haunted him. But there was also something in Celes's eyes, a weariness and disillusionment that spoke to someone questioning everything she had ever believed. Locke freed her, and together they fought their way out of South Figaro and into the caves beyond. Celes was initially reluctant to trust him, uncertain whether his rescue was genuine or simply another form of manipulation. But as they traveled together, she began to open up about her doubts, about the atrocities she had witnessed in the Empire's name, about the growing sense that she had been fighting for the wrong side all along. She spoke of villages burned, of civilians killed for the crime of refusing to submit, of orders that made her sick to carry out, but which she followed nonetheless out of misguided loyalty. Meanwhile, Sabin's unexpected journey took him far to the east. He washed up near the Imperial camp, besieging Doma Castle, the last stronghold of a kingdom that had refused to submit to Gestahl's rule. There, Sabin encountered Shadow, a mysterious assassin who worked as a mercenary for whoever could afford his fee. Shadow was accompanied by an equally enigmatic dog named Interceptor, a loyal and deadly companion who attacked anyone who threatened his master. Despite Shadow's mercenary nature, something about the siege of Doma bothered him. The Imperial forces were led by General Leo Christoph, a man known for his honor and his reluctance to cause unnecessary bloodshed. Leo was attempting to negotiate Doma's surrender, hoping to bring them into the Empire peacefully. He spoke of minimizing casualties, of finding a diplomatic solution, of treating the people of Doma with dignity even in defeat. But Leo was called back to Vector, leaving the siege in the hands of Kefka Palazzo. What happened next would become one of the game's most haunting atrocities, a moment that defined Kefka as a villain of singular cruelty. Rather than risk his soldiers in a prolonged siege, Kefka ordered the kingdom's water supply to be poisoned. The poison was fast-acting and indiscriminate. Within hours, everyone inside Doma Castle was dead. The king, the soldiers, the servants, the families, all of them killed by an enemy they never saw coming. There was no battle, no chance to fight back, just a slow and agonizing death that came from something as simple as drinking water. Among the victims were the wife and son of Kyan Garamonde, a samurai and retainer to the king of Doma. Tyan survived only because he was on the castle walls when the poison struck. He returned to find everyone he loved dead, their bodies still warm, the poison's effects having been horrifyingly quick. The grief and rage that consumed Kyan in that moment was beyond words. He took up his sword and charged the Imperial camp alone, a one-man assault driven by nothing but the need to make someone, anyone, pay for what had been taken from him. Sabin and Shadow, witnessing this suicidal charge, intervened. They fought alongside Kyan, helped him escape the camp, and slowly, carefully, began to pull him back from the edge of his grief. The three of them boarded what they thought was a train to safety, only to discover they had boarded the Phantom train, a supernatural locomotive that carried souls to the afterlife. The journey through the Phantom train was surreal and melancholic. Ghosts wandered the cars, some hostile, others simply confused about their deaths. In one of the compartments, Tyan saw his wife and son among the spirits, finally at peace. no longer in pain. It was a moment of crushing sorrow and strange relief. They were gone, truly and finally gone. And while Kyan's grief remained, seeing them one last time allowed him to let them go. He knelt before their spirits and wept, not just for what he had lost, but for what they had all lost, for the world that had taken them from him and the empire that had made it possible. The train deposited the three travelers near the veldt, a vast wilderness inhabited by every type of monster imaginable. There they encountered Gao, a 13-year-old feral child who had grown up among the beasts. Gao had no memory of human society, no language beyond grunts and growls, but he was friendly and curious. His skin was tanned and weathered from years in the wilderness, his movements more animal than human. With the promise of food and shiny things, they convinced Gao to help them reach Narshe, adding another member to their growing band. Gao moved with them through the wilderness, occasionally darting off to investigate something that caught his attention, always returning with the excitement of someone discovering the world for the first time. Terra and Edgar's path, meanwhile, had taken them successfully to Narshe. The elder of the city, previously reluctant to take sides, finally agreed to ally with the returners when word came that Kefka was assembling a massive imperial force to attack Narshe and claim the frozen Esper. The returners, the people of Narshe, and all the allies they had gathered prepared for a desperate defense. They fortified positions, set up defensive lines, and waited for the inevitable assault. When the three scenarios converged, the entire party reunited just in time for the Battle of Narshe. Kefka's forces assaulted the city from multiple angles, his troops equipped with Magitech armor and backed by his own magical abilities. The defense was chaotic, with the party forced to divide their forces to cover different fronts. Soldiers fell on both sides, the snow running red with blood. Magitech armor stomped through defensive positions, while defenders desperately tried to hold the line. They won, but it was a close thing. Kefka retreated, driven back by a combination of clever tactics and desperate determination. But the victory was bittersweet. During the battle, something had happened to Terra. Standing before the frozen Esper, she had begun to react to its presence. Her body had started to glow, her form shifting, and before anyone could reach her, she had transformed into something else, something with wings and scales, an Esper-like creature that radiated raw magical power. The transformation was accompanied by a burst of energy that had helped repel the Imperial forces, but it had also been accompanied by terror. Terra, not understanding what was happening to her, had fled in this new form, leaving her allies behind and disappearing into the mountains. Her flight was not one of conscious choice, but of pure panic, the fear of someone who no longer recognized what they had become. The search for Terra became the party's next priority. They tracked her to Zozo, a lawless town where every inhabitant was a thief and every building was falling apart. The streets stank of refuse and desperation. Every person they met lied to them, either out of habit or out of genuine malice. At the top of Zozo's tallest structure, they found an old man, an Esper named Ramu, who had been hiding in the human world for years. Ramu had found Terra and was helping her calm down, helping her understand that what had happened was not a curse, but a revelation of her true nature. Terra Bramford was half human and half Esper, the daughter of a human woman named Madeline and an Esper named Maduin. She had been born in the Esper world, but as a child, she had been separated from her father and captured by the Empire. They had kept her imprisoned and enslaved for over a year, using her natural magical abilities for their own purposes, controlling her with the slave crown that had finally been destroyed in Narshe. This revelation shook Terra to her core. She was not fully human, not fully Esper, but something in between. The transformation she had experienced in Narshe was the awakening of her Esper heritage, a power she had never known she possessed. Ramu helped her understand that she could control this power, that she did not need to fear it, but it would take practice and self-knowledge to master. The ability to transform was part of who she was, and denying it would be like denying her own existence. Before sending the party on their way, Ramu made a request. Other Espers were still imprisoned in Vector, trapped in the Magatech research facility and drained of their power. If the party could infiltrate the facility and free them, it would strike a major blow against the Empire's ability to create more Magitech knights and Magitech armor. More importantly, it would be the right thing to do. The Espers were sentient beings, not resources to be exploited. They deserved freedom, deserved the chance to return to their own world and live in peace. Before they could attempt such a dangerous mission, they needed transportation. The party made their way to Jidor, a wealthy town where they hoped to find leads on reaching the southern continent where Vector lay. In the mansion of a wealthy art collector named Orza, they encountered the impresario of the nearby opera house. He was in a panic, having received a letter stating that a gambler named Celes planned to kidnap the opera's star performer, Maria, during her next performance. Celes owned the world's only airship, and that airship was exactly what the returners needed. A plan quickly formed. Celes bore a striking resemblance to Maria, similar enough that with the right costume and makeup, she could pass for the opera singer. If Celes performed in Maria's place, Celes would kidnap her as planned, giving the rest of the party the opportunity to sneak aboard his airship and convince him to help their cause. It was a risky plan, full of variables they couldn't control, but it was their best shot at acquiring the transportation they desperately needed. The opera house itself was a marvel of architecture and acoustics, a testament to the culture that could flourish even in a world threatened by imperial conquest. As Celes prepared backstage, nervous about performing before an audience, Locke reassured her that she would be fine. He helped her learn the lines, walked her through the staging, and tried to ease her obvious anxiety. There was something tender in these moments, a connection forming between the treasure hunter and the former imperial general that went beyond simple camaraderie. The opera began, a production called Maria and Draco, a romantic tale of a princess torn between duty and love. Celes performed admirably, her voice carrying through the hall as she sang the famous piece known as the Aria di Mezzo Carattere. The audience was captivated, unaware that the woman on stage was not their beloved Maria, but an imposter. But trouble arrived in the form of Ultros, the theatrical octopus who had attacked them on the Lethe River. He had somehow learned of their plan and positioned himself in the rafters, preparing to drop a massive weight onto the stage and crush Celes. Locke discovered the threat and raced through the backstage area, fighting through rats and navigating the complicated machinery of the theatre to reach Ultros before disaster struck. He and his companions tumbled onto the stage mid-performance, landing in a heap and knocking unconscious the actors playing the male leads. The audience gasped, uncertain whether this was part of the show. Locke, thinking quickly, attempted to play it off as an elaborate stage effect, engaging Ultros in battle while the orchestra continued to play. The fight was as absurd as it was desperate. with Ultros hamming it up for the crowd and Locke trying to protect Celes while maintaining the illusion of a scripted performance. When Ultros finally fled, defeated once more, the audience erupted in applause, convinced they had witnessed the greatest opera performance of their lives. And then, right on cue, Setzer descended from above, grabbing Celes and whisking her away to his airship, the Blackjack. The rest of the party managed to stow away on the airship, emerging once Setzer had Celes safely in his cabin. The gambler was surprised but not particularly alarmed. He listened to their proposal, considered their request to use his airship, and then proposed a wager. They would flip a coin. Heads, he would help them. Tails, Celes would become his bride as originally planned. It seemed like fair odds, except that the coin Edgar produced was a two-headed coin from Figaro, specially minted with the faces of both brothers. The same coin that had determined which brother would rule and which would be free to pursue his own path. Setzer, recognizing the con but amused by their audacity, agreed to help them anyway. He was a gambler and a thrill-seeker, and the opportunity to strike back against the Empire appealed to his sense of adventure. Besides, there was something in Celes that reminded him of someone he had lost, a woman named Darrell, who had been his partner in racing airships across the world until her death in a tragic accident. Perhaps helping these rebels was a way to honor her memory, to do something meaningful with the life she had encouraged him to live fully. The infiltration of Vector was a turning point in the story. The party made their way into the heart of the Empire's capital, sneaking through sewers and alleys to reach the Magitech research facility. The city itself was a monument to Imperial power, all steel and concrete and marching soldiers. Propaganda posters lined the walls, proclaiming Emperor Gestah's wisdom and the glory of Imperial expansion. Citizens hurried about their business with heads down, afraid to attract attention. The Magitech research facility was a nightmare made real. In sterile chambers, they witnessed the horror of what the Empire had been doing. Espers were held in tubes, their magical essence slowly drained, their bodies withering. The facility hummed with machines designed to extract and process magical energy, to reduce living, feeling beings into nothing more than fuel for the Empire's war machine. In one room, they found Kefka himself, torturing two Espers, Ifrit and Shiva, who had been drained to near death. Kefka carelessly tossed their bodies into a garbage chute, declaring them used up and worthless, laughing as he did so. The casual cruelty of the act, the complete disregard for life, demonstrated just how far gone Kefka's humanity truly was. He was beyond redemption, beyond reason. He was a force of pure destruction wearing a human face. The party managed to retrieve the crystallized remains of these Espers, discovering in the process the true nature of magicite, the concentrated essence of a dead Esper that could transfer magical knowledge and power to those who held it. They freed the captive Espers, but the rescue came too late. The Espers had been drained too much, their bodies unable to sustain themselves. One by one, they transformed into magicite, their physical forms dissolving, leaving only crystalline shards that pulsed with residual magic. Each transformation was accompanied by a soft light, a final moment of peace as their suffering ended. Professor Sid, the head of the research facility, witnessed this and finally understood the full cost of what he had been doing. The Espers had to die to become magicite, meaning every Magitech knight, including Celes, his adopted daughter, had been created through the deaths of sentient beings. The weight of that realization broke something in Sid. He had told himself he was advancing human knowledge, serving his emperor, doing what was necessary for the good of the Empire. But in that moment, seeing the Espers die, Understanding that Celes' power had come from such suffering, he could no longer lie to himself. He helped the party escape, giving them access to a minecart that would take them out of the facility and back to the Blackjack. But before they could leave, Kefka appeared with Celes in tow. He claimed she had been playing the returners all along, that her defection had been a ruse to infiltrate their ranks and lead the Empire to them. He ordered Celes to hand over the magicite they had recovered, to prove her loyalty to the Empire once and for all. The moment hung suspended in time. Locke's face showed betrayal and hurt. The others raised their weapons defensively, and Kefka smiled his painted smile, certain that his trap had worked perfectly. Celes stood between them all, the magicite heavy in her hands, her expression unreadable. This was the moment that would define everything that followed, the crossroads where she would choose who she truly was. She turned to face Kefka, and for a heartbeat, it seemed she might comply. Then she hurled the magicite to Locke, drawing her sword in the same fluid motion. The relief on Locke's face was immediate and profound. He had believed in her when she had barely believed in herself, and she had not betrayed that faith. The party fought their way out of the facility, Celes matching them blow for blow, no longer a former Imperial general, but a full-fledged member of the resistance. Setzer flew them north, away from Vector, to a remote village called Tamasa that Ramu had told them about. This was where the descendants of the Magi from the ancient war had settled, where the last humans with natural magical abilities lived in hiding. The village was small and unassuming, its residents friendly but evasive about their heritage. 1,000 years of persecution had taught them to guard their secrets carefully, to pretend they were ordinary people living ordinary lives. They sought out Stragomagus, an elderly gentleman whom Ramu had mentioned as someone knowledgeable about Espers. Strago was initially reluctant to help, claiming to know nothing about magic or Espers, maintaining the village's practiced deception. But when a house caught fire with his granddaughter Realm trapped inside, the truth revealed itself. Strago used his magic to try to save her, his blue magic drawing upon the abilities of monsters he had encountered throughout his long life. Terra, Locke, and whichever other companions had accompanied them, rushed into the burning building to help. Inside, they found 10-year-old Realm Aroni, a precocious child with extraordinary magical talent. She wielded a paintbrush as her weapon, able to bring her paintings to life or capture the essence of enemies in her art. Together, they rescued her from the flames, and Strago, his secret exposed and his gratitude overwhelming, agreed to help them reach the gate to the Esper world. The cave to the sealed gate was hidden nearby, its entrance concealed by natural formations and ancient magic. Strago guided them through passages that twisted and turned, past underground rivers and chambers filled with the remnants of the old war. The gate itself was massive, ornate, covered in inscriptions warning against disturbing what lay beyond. The Espers had sealed this portal a millennium ago, severing the connection between their world and the human one. Opening it again might have consequences no one could predict, but the returners needed allies, needed to understand the Espers and convince them that not all humans were like the Empire. Terra, being half Esper herself, was key to this plan. She could serve as a bridge between the two peoples, could show the Espers that cooperation was still possible. Using the magicite they had recovered from the Magitech research facility, they opened the sealed gate. The magical barrier dissolved, and beyond it lay a realm unlike anything in the mortal world. The Esper world was beautiful and alien, a dimension where magic flowed as naturally as air. Crystalline structures floated in multi-hued skies. Energy pulsed through the very ground beneath their feet. But the Espers who met them at the gate were not welcoming. They saw humans and assumed the worst, saw their dead transformed into magicite, and believed this was another attack, another attempt to exploit and destroy them. The Espers, led by Ura, their elder, attacked in a surge of magical fury. They burst through the gate into the human world, their rage and grief overwhelming their judgment. They flew toward Vector, toward the Empire's capital, intent on destroying the source of their people's suffering once and for all. The party could only watch in horror as the Espers disappeared into the distance, leaving destruction in their wake. They had hoped to forge peace, to create an alliance. Instead, they had unleashed a catastrophe. The Espers reached Vector and attacked with the full force of their combined magic. Buildings collapsed, walls shattered, fires erupted across the Imperial capital. The Empire's soldiers and Magitech armor tried to mount a defense, but they were woefully unprepared for an assault of this magnitude. The Espers had spent 1,000 years watching from their sealed realm as humanity rebuilt. Now they showed the Empire what true magical power looked like, what the ancient Magi had wielded before the old world burned. But the Espers' rampage did not discriminate between Imperial soldiers and innocent civilians. People who had nothing to do with the Magitech experiments, citizens simply trying to survive under Gestah's rule, died alongside the soldiers. Children, merchants, servants, all of them perished in the flames and the fury. By the time the Espers' rage finally spent itself, Vector was in ruins, and the Espers themselves had been drained to the point of death. Their bodies transformed into magicite, adding more crystalline remains to the tragic collection. When the smoke cleared, Emperor Gestahl emerged from his palace, but he did not respond with more violence. Instead, in a move that shocked everyone, he called for peace. He claimed that the attack on Vector had shown him the error of his ways, that he finally understood that magic and Espers could not simply be controlled and exploited. He invited the returners to the Imperial Palace for a banquet, to discuss terms for a peace treaty that would end the war and ensure no more Espers would be harmed. It was almost certainly a trap. Every instinct the returners possessed screamed at them not to trust Gestahl, not to believe that a man who had spent years conquering the world would suddenly embrace peace. But what choice did they have? If there was even a chance for genuine peace, even a small possibility that the war could end without more death, they had to take it. Besides, refusing the invitation would give Gestahl the excuse he needed to resume open warfare. The banquet in Vector was a surreal experience, an elaborate feast where yesterday's enemies smiled and toasted to peace. Gestahl played the gracious host, speaking eloquently about the futility of conflict and his desire for a better world. General Leo was there as well, his relief at the peace genuine and visible. Leo had always been uncomfortable with the Empire's more brutal tactics, and the possibility of ending the bloodshed clearly meant everything to him. Gestahl proposed sending a delegation to Thamasa, the village where the party had met Strago and Realm. His stated goal was to meet with the Espers who lived there, to apologize for the Empire's actions, and to forge a genuine peace between humans and Espers. He wanted Terra to accompany the delegation, to serve as proof of his sincere intentions. And he wanted General Leo to lead it, knowing that Leo's honor and reputation would lend credibility to the mission. The party agreed, though not without reservations. Terra, Leo, and several others traveled back to Thamasa to make contact with the Espers. The mission seemed to be going well. The Espers were cautious, but willing to listen. Leo spoke with genuine emotion about his desire for peace, about his hope that humans and Espers could coexist without fear or violence. Yura and the other Espers seemed moved by his words, seemed to believe that perhaps peace was possible. And then Kefka arrived, and everything went to hell. He came with a battalion of Magatech armor, appearing just as the peace talks reached their critical moment. The entire negotiation had been a ruse, a cruel deception orchestrated by Gestahl to locate the remaining Espers and capture them. Kefka's soldiers surrounded the Espers before they could react, binding them with magical chains. Kefka himself cackled with delight at the success of the trap, mocking Leo for his naive belief in peace. Leo was horrified. He had genuinely believed in the peace talks, had thought he was serving a noble cause. The realization that he had been used, that his honor and reputation had been weaponized to lure the Espers into a trap, broke something in him. He turned on Kefka, demanded that he release the Espers, declared that he would no longer serve an empire that would perpetrate such monstrous deception. Kefka's response was to laugh. He mocked Leo's honor as weakness, dismissed his convictions as pathetic sentimentality. And when Leo drew his sword and moved to stop him, Kefka attacked with the full force of his magical abilities. The fight was short and brutal. Leo was strong, skilled, one of the Empire's greatest warriors. But Kefka had magic, had the stolen power of dozens of dead Espers flowing through him. He struck Leo down, killed him in front of everyone, and felt nothing but amusement at the death of a man who had served the Empire loyally for years. The Espers, witnessing Leo's death, understood the depth of the Empire's betrayal. They fought desperately to escape, but Kefka's soldiers overwhelmed them one by one. As each Esper fell, Kefka transformed them into magicite, adding to his collection of stolen power. He destroyed the village of Tamasa as well, burning it to ashes just because he could, because destruction brought him joy. The party barely escaped with their lives, carrying Leo's body and a handful of magicite that represented all that remained of the Espers who had trusted them. While this massacre was unfolding, Emperor Gestahl had not been idle. He had traveled to the cave to the sealed gate and passed through into the Esper world. There, he found what he had been seeking all along, the statues of the Warring Triad, the three gods whose power had created magic itself. For 1,000 years, these statues had remained in perfect balance, sealed away by the Espers to prevent their power from being misused. Gestahl shattered that balance, claiming the Triad's power for himself. With the might of the gods at his command, Gestahl raised an island from beneath the ocean. The very landmass where the cave to the sealed gate stood tore free from the seabed and lifted into the sky, becoming the floating continent. It hovered above the world like a monument to imperial ambition. Its peaks scraped the clouds, and at its summit stood the three statues of the Warring Triad, their power barely contained. Gestahl announced his intention from the floating continent. He would use the power of the Warring Triad to reshape the world in the Empire's image. All nations would submit or be destroyed. All opposition would be crushed. The era of human freedom was over. The age of the Empire Eternal had begun. His voice boomed across the world through magical amplification, ensuring that every person on the planet heard his declaration. The returners knew they had one chance to stop this. If Gestahl succeeded in fully mastering the power of the Warring Triad, no force on Earth could stand against him. They had to reach the floating continent, had to stop him before he could complete whatever ritual would grant him total control over the god's power. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only mission that mattered. Everything they had fought for, everyone they had lost, would mean nothing if they failed now. Setzer flew the blackjack toward the floating continent, knowing the Imperial Air Force would try to stop them. The sky filled with enemy airships, Magitech armor flying in formation, all of them converging on the single rebel vessel that dared approach Gestahli's sanctuary. The battle in the sky was chaotic and desperate. Wave after wave of Imperial soldiers attacked, their mechanized armor clashing against the returners' magic and weapons. And then, in the middle of the aerial battle, a familiar purple figure appeared. Ultros, the theatrical octopus who had harassed them throughout their journey, returned for one final performance. He had somehow acquired an ally, a bizarre green creature named Chupon, and together they attacked the blackjack. The battle would have been comical under other circumstances, Ultros hamming it up as always, making terrible puns even as he tried to kill them. But there was no time for humor. They needed to reach the floating continent before it was too late. They defeated Ultros and Chupon, fought off the last of the Imperial Air Force, and crash-landed on the floating continent itself. The blackjack was badly damaged, unable to fly until repairs could be made. They would have to proceed on foot, fighting their way across the floating island to reach its summit where Gestahl waited. The landscape was alien and hostile, the very ground beneath their feet radiating magical energy. Monsters warped by the Triad's power roamed freely, attacking anything that moved. They found Shadow near the landing site, wounded and bitter. The Empire had tried to kill him once his usefulness ended, seeing him as a loose end to be eliminated. Shadow agreed to accompany them, at least until they reached the summit. He owed the Empire nothing and had no love for Kefka or Gestahl. If the returners wanted to bring down the Empire, he would help them do it, if only to settle his own scores. The climb to the summit was treacherous, both in terms of the monsters they faced and the time pressure bearing down on them. Every minute they spent fighting was another minute Gestahl had to solidify his control over the warring Triad. They pushed forward despite exhaustion, despite wounds, despite the growing sense that they were already too late. At the summit, they found Gestahl and Kefka standing before the three statues, magical energy swirling around them in visible currents. Gestahl greeted them almost warmly, as if welcoming guests to a party rather than enemies who had come to stop him. He used the Triad's power to bind everyone except Celes, freezing them in place with invisible magical chains. Then he made her an offer. One final chance to return to the Empire. She had been one of his greatest creations, a Magitech knight without equal. Join him now, help him rule the new world he was creating, and she would have power beyond imagination. All she had to do was kill her friends, prove her loyalty by ending their lives with the sword he placed in her hand. The world held its breath. Locke, frozen but conscious, watched Celes with eyes that held more hope than fear. He believed in her, believed in the woman she had become, rather than the general she had been. Terra, Edgar, Sabin, all of them waited to see what choice she would make. And Kefka watched too, his painted face twisted in gleeful anticipation of whatever violence might follow. Celes took the sword. She weighed it in her hand, feeling its balance, its deadly potential. She looked at her friends, at the people who had accepted her despite her past, who had given her a reason to believe in something other than the Empire's lies. She looked at Gestahl, at the Emperor who had claimed to care for her while using her as a weapon, who had made her complicit in atrocities she could never atone for. She turned and drove the sword into Kefka's chest. The shock on Kefka's face was almost comical, the disbelief that anyone would dare strike him. The blade pierced his garish costume, and though it did not kill him, it sent a clear message about where Celes' loyalties truly lay. Kefka's surprise transformed instantly into rage, a psychotic fury that knew no bounds. He screamed at Gestahl, demanded they unleash the full power of the warring triad, forget about ruling the world, and simply destroy it instead. Gestahl tried to calm him, tried to reassert control. He had wanted to rule, not annihilate. The warring triad's power was meant to enforce his dominion, not end all life. But Kefka had passed beyond listening to reason or orders. He had embraced nihilism so completely that existence itself offended him. He wanted to watch the world burn, wanted to reduce everything to ash and chaos, wanted to prove that life had no meaning by ending all life. The Emperor attempted to use his own magic to stop Kefka, to bind him as he had bound the returners. But Kefka stood too close to the warring triad. The statues absorbed Gestahl's attacks, leaving Kefka unharmed and laughing at his Emperor's impotence. Then Kefka called upon the triad's power himself, commanded them to strike Gestahl down. Lightning erupted from the statues, bolt after bolt slamming into the Emperor who had awakened them. Gestahl fell, his body broken and smoking. Kefka did not give him a chance to recover or make a final speech. He simply kicked the dying Emperor off the edge of the floating continent, sending him tumbling through the clouds to the world far below. The man who had dreamed of conquest, who had started a war that engulfed the planet, died not as a triumphant ruler, but as a footnote to someone else's madness. With Gestahl gone, Kefka turned, his attention to the warring triad. The statues stood in perfect balance, their positioning the key to keeping their power contained. Kefka began moving the statues, pushing them out of alignment, shattering the delicate equilibrium that had held for 1,000 years. The party, freed from their magical bonds when Gestahl died, screamed at him to stop, tried to reach him before he could complete his work. But they were too late. The statues shifted, their balance broke, and the power of the gods erupted in every direction at once. Shadow appeared from nowhere, distracting Kefka just long enough for the others to run. He shouted at them to get back to the airship, to escape while they still could. The floating continent was coming apart, massive chunks of earth tearing free and falling toward the world below. Magical energy crackled through the air, reality itself seeming to buckle under the strain of the gods' unleashed power. They ran, fighting through monsters and collapsing terrain, racing against time itself. At the edge of the continent, they faced a choice. The blackjack was just ahead, Setzer desperately trying to get it airborne again. But Shadow was still behind them, still fighting to buy them time. If they waited for him, they might all die. If they left without him, he would certainly perish. It was a terrible calculus, the kind of decision that haunts people forever regardless of what they choose. Some waited, some did not. It depended on the bonds they had formed, the loyalties they had built. Either way, they barely made it aboard as the blackjack lifted off, its engines straining, damage from the earlier battle making every movement uncertain. They flew as fast as they could away from the floating continent, watching it disintegrate behind them. And then the true catastrophe began. The power of the warring triad, no longer contained or balanced, cascaded across the world. It struck like a tidal wave of pure magical energy, reshaping everything it touched. Mountains moved, oceans shifted, continents cracked and reformed. The very face of the planet was rewritten in moments of apocalyptic transformation. Cities were swallowed by the earth, forests were incinerated, Rivers evaporated or changed course entirely. The blackjack, caught in this magical maelstrom, was torn apart. The airship that had carried them so far, that had been their sanctuary and their hope, disintegrated around them. The party members were thrown into the chaos, scattered across a dying world, separated by forces they could not resist or control. They fell through turbulent skies, some hitting water, some landing in wreckage, all of them alone in the moment when everything ended. The world screamed as it died. Billions of lives were snuffed out in an instant. Entire civilizations vanished, their people given no time to understand what was happening or why. The careful balance between the continents shattered, and where once there had been nations and kingdoms, now there was only ruin. The very climate changed, poisoned by magical radiation, the skies turning a permanent crimson, the air thick with ash and the smell of death. When the cataclysm finally ended, when the warring triad's power finished its terrible work, the world that remained was barely recognizable. Where the Empire's capital had stood, a massive tower now rose, formed from the debris and rubble of 1,000 destroyed cities. This was Kefka's tower, a monument to destruction, and at its peak sat Kefka himself, transformed by the god's power into something more than human. He had become the god of magic, a being of terrible power who could reshape reality with a thought. He wielded the light of judgment, a beam of pure destructive energy that could annihilate anything he targeted. Whenever the whim struck him, whenever boredom overtook his madness, he would fire this light at some random part of the world, killing whoever happened to be there, destroying whatever remained standing. The survivors lived in constant terror, never knowing when death might fall from the sky. The world that had been, the world of balance, with its cities and nations and conflicts, was gone forever. What remained was called the world of ruin, a broken husk of a planet where the few survivors struggled simply to find food and clean water. Most of the party was missing, presumed dead. Terra had vanished. The returners were scattered or destroyed. The empire that had threatened them had been replaced by something far worse, a nihilistic god who ruled through random violence and whose only goal was to prove that life itself was meaningless. And in this world of ash and despair, 1 year after the cataclysm, a young woman woke up on a small island, opened her eyes, and wondered why she was still alive. Her name was Celes, and she was the only one who could save what remained of the world. The solitary island was exactly what its name suggested, a tiny piece of rock in the middle of a poisoned ocean, too small and remote to have attracted Kefka's attention. Celes had washed up here after the blackjack was destroyed, unconscious and nearly drowned. The only other inhabitant was Professor Cid del Norte Marquez, the man who had created the Magitech process, who had infused her with magical power, who had raised her as his daughter even as he used her as an experiment. Cid had found Celes on the beach and carried her to the island's only structure, a small house with basic supplies. He had cared for her during her year-long sleep, feeding her, keeping her alive, while her body slowly recovered from the trauma of the cataclysm. Now, finally awake, Celes had to face the reality of what had happened. The world had ended. Her friends were gone. Everything they had fought for had been reduced to ash. Cid was dying. The fish around the island had been poisoned by the magical fallout from the cataclysm, and eating them was slowly killing him. Celes tried desperately to save him, to find the few fish that were still clean, to nurse him back to health. But the odds were against them. Almost every fish in the poisoned waters was toxic, and Sid grew weaker with each passing day. He spoke to her of regrets, of the mistakes he had made, of his sorrow at having helped create the weapons that enabled Kefka's rise to power. If Celes managed to find enough clean fish, if luck favored her, Sid recovered. He showed her a raft he had built, told her she needed to leave the island, to find the mainland and search for other survivors. There had to be someone else out there, had to be some remnant of the world that was worth fighting for. Celes was reluctant to leave him, but Sid insisted. He would be fine on the island. She needed to go, needed to live, needed to find hope in a hopeless world. But if the fish were too poisoned, if Celes could not find enough clean ones, Sid died despite her efforts. The man who had been her father, for all his flaws and mistakes, died in her arms on a desolate island, while the world continued to die around them. The grief and despair that consumed Celes in that moment was absolute. Everyone was gone. Everything was lost. What was the point of surviving if survival meant only more suffering? She climbed to the highest point on the island, to the cliff that overlooked the ocean. She stood at the edge and looked down at the rocks and the waves far below. It would be so easy to step forward, to end the pain, to follow Sid and all the others into whatever came after death. She had tried so hard to become a better person, to atone for her actions as an imperial general, to find purpose beyond simply following orders. And it had all been for nothing. Kefka had won. The world had ended. There was nothing left to fight for. She jumped. The fall seemed to last forever. The wind rushed past her, the rocks rushed up to meet her, and in that final moment, Celes felt something like peace. At least the pain would end. At least she would not have to face another day in a world without hope. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A freak updraft caught her, pushed her away from the rocks, sent her tumbling into the water instead. She survived, battered and bruised but alive, washed up on the beach like driftwood. And there, tangled in seaweed near where she lay, she found a bandana. Locke's bandana, the distinctive blue cloth he always wore, tied to the leg of a wounded seagull. The bird must have traveled from somewhere far away, must have been trained to carry messages, or simply followed some instinct that led it here. But the message was clear. Locke was alive, somewhere out there in the ruined world, and he had sent this bird, had sent this signal, hoping someone would find it. Celes lay on the beach, holding the bandana, and wept. They were not tears of despair, but of something else, something she had thought lost forever. Hope. If Locke was alive, maybe others had survived too. Maybe Terra, Sabin, Edgar, all of them had somehow endured the cataclysm and were out there searching for each other just as she searched for them. She had tried to die, to give up, and fate had refused to let her. The universe, or Locke, or simple stubborn chance, was telling her that the fight was not over. Celes took the raft Sid had built, whether he had recovered or died, and set out across the poisoned ocean. The journey was harrowing, the waters rough and the sky an ominous red, but she made it to the southern continent. The landscape that greeted her was one of devastation. Towns she had known were gone, replaced by ruins and rubble. The few settlements that remained were populated by survivors who had given up, who simply waited for Kefka's light of judgment to find them and end their misery. But in the town of Tsen, something different happened. Kefka's light of judgment struck while Celes was there. The beam of destructive energy slamming into a tall building and causing it to collapse. People screamed and ran, certain that everyone inside was doomed. But then, impossibly, the building stopped falling. Something was holding it up, keeping the structure from completely collapsing. That something was Sabin René Figaro, using every ounce of his martial artist strength to bear the weight of the building on his shoulders. Celes ran inside, navigating through falling debris and cracking support beams, and found a child trapped in the basement. She freed the child, carried him to safety, and when they emerged, Sabin finally let go. The building collapsed behind them in a cloud of dust and rubble, but the child was safe. Sabin smiled at Celes, that same confident grin she remembered, and it was like a light had been turned on in the darkness. They embraced, two survivors finding each other in the ruins, and in that moment, the quest to reunite the party truly began. Together, Celes and Sabin began searching for the others. They traveled to Nicaea, a port town that had survived relatively intact, and there they heard rumors of a gang of thieves called the Crimson Robbers, led by a man named Gerard. Gerard was described as a master thief and schemer, someone who had recruited the best criminals from around the world for some grand heist. But when they finally caught up to the Crimson Robbers, Celes and Sabin recognized Gerard immediately. The disguise was good, the fake beard and the rough manner convincing. But no one could mistake Edgar Ronnie Figaro's eyes, his distinctive mannerisms, the intelligence that showed through no matter what persona he adopted. Edgar had survived the cataclysm and found that Figaro Castle, his mobile fortress, had become trapped underground due to the shifting continents. Unable to access it alone, he had assembled a team of thieves and criminals to help him break in. The reunion was emotional but brief. They had a castle to infiltrate. The three of them, along with Edgar's assembled thieves, made their way through South Figaro and into the cave system that connected to the castle's underground mechanisms. The path was dangerous, filled with monsters that had been mutated by the magical energy of the cataclysm. When they finally reached Figaro Castle's engine room, Edgar dropped his Gerard disguise and revealed his true identity. The castle's engines roared to life under his expert maintenance, and the fortress once again became mobile, able to travel beneath the sands. With three members of the party reunited and a base of operations established, the search for the others intensified. They had hope now, tangible proof that survival was possible, that scattered across this dying world were people still fighting, still refusing to give up. Each new reunion was a victory against despair, each discovered friend a small piece of the world that was restored. They found Cyan Garamond on Mount Zozo, that lawless town where they had first discovered Terra's heritage. Cyan had survived the cataclysm, but was haunted by nightmares of his dead family, unable to move forward, trapped in his grief. It took the party entering his dreams through magical intervention, confronting the literal demons that tormented him, to help Cyan finally begin to heal. He learned that his wife and child would want him to live, to fight, to find new purpose even in their absence. He rejoined the party with renewed determination, his blade once again in service of a cause. Gao, the feral child of the Veldt, had survived as well, his animal instincts and wild resilience carrying him through when civilization collapsed. They found him still living among the beasts, unchanged by the cataclysm in some fundamental way. The wilderness had always been his home, and the destruction of human society meant less to him than it did to others. He was overjoyed to see his friends again and agreed to travel with them once more. In the cave on the Veldt, if the party had waited for Shadow on the floating continent, they found him wounded but alive. The mercenary had somehow survived the fall, the destruction, and a year in the wasteland. He had been searching for a legendary weapon, the Ichigeki dagger, something to give him purpose in a purposeless world. When the party wagered for the blade at the Dragon's Neck Colosseum, Shadow himself appeared as their opponent, and defeating him in combat was the only way to convince him to rejoin their cause. He agreed with his characteristic terseness, acknowledging that even a mercenary needed something worth fighting for. Locke Cole had been alive all this time, on his own quest. For years before the cataclysm, he had been searching for a way to revive Rachel, a woman he had loved, who had died because of his failure to protect her. That guilt had driven him to call himself a treasure hunter rather than a thief, to protect every woman he encountered, because he had failed to protect the one who mattered most. Rachel's body had been preserved through magic kept in a state between life and death, waiting for a cure that might never come. In the world of ruin, Locke had finally found what he sought, the legendary Phoenix Magicite, capable of resurrection, lay hidden in the Phoenix Cave, a treacherous dungeon that required two separate parties working in tandem to navigate. When the party found Locke, he was obsessed, focused entirely on reaching the Magicite and saving Rachel. They helped him navigate the cave's puzzles and defeat its guardians. And when he finally held the Phoenix Magicite in his hands, they returned with him to the basement in Kohlingen, where Rachel's body had been preserved all these years. The Phoenix's power was real. Rachel's body stirred, her eyes opened, and for a brief, beautiful moment, she was alive again. She saw Locke, recognized him, smiled with the love she had always felt. And then she spoke the words he needed to hear. She told him she had never blamed him for what happened, that her death was not his fault, that he needed to let her go and live his own life. She told him to be happy, to find love again, to stop carrying the weight of her death like a burden he deserved to bear. And then Rachel died, truly and finally this time. The Phoenix's power unable to sustain her for more than those few precious moments. But they were enough. Locke had received the absolution he had sought for so long, the permission to forgive himself and move forward. When he emerged from the basement, his eyes found Celes, and something passed between them that had been building since the opera house, since South Figaro, since the moment she had chosen to trust him. There would be time later for whatever they were becoming to each other. For now, they had a world to save. Setzer Gabbiani had survived as well, though his survival felt more like a punishment than a blessing. His beloved blackjack had been destroyed in the cataclysm, taking with it the last remnant of his life with Daryl, the woman whose death had driven him to become the world's greatest gambler. He had been living drunk and despondent in the remains of Kohlingen, unable to see a point in continuing. But when the party found him and reminded him of what they were fighting for, something of his old spirit returned. They discovered Daryl's tomb, hidden and preserved, and within it was her airship, the Falcon. It had been entombed with her as a memorial, but now it could serve a higher purpose. Setzer took control of the Falcon, and though it would never replace the blackjack in his heart, it gave him the means to fight back against Kefka. The gambler who had lost everything found a reason to risk one more bet, to stake his life on the chance that hope could triumph over despair. The search for Terra Bramford proved the most difficult and the most crucial. Rumours placed her in Moblise, a small village on the southern continent that had somehow survived the cataclysm, relatively intact. When the party arrived, they found the village populated mostly by children, orphans whose parents had died in the destruction of the world. And caring for these children, having given up her power and her identity as a warrior, was Terra. She had found the children in the immediate aftermath of the cataclysm, helpless and terrified, and something in her had shifted. For so long, Terra had struggled with her identity, uncertain whether she was human or Esper, uncertain where she belonged or what she was meant to do. But these children needed her, needed someone to protect them and care for them. And in that need, she had finally found purpose. She had become their guardian, their mother figure, the one constant in a world that had taken everything else from them. The party tried to convince her to rejoin them, to help them fight Kefka. Terra refused. She had spent her entire life being used as a weapon, first by the Empire and then by the Returners. She had fought and killed and transformed into a monster, and all of it had led to the world's destruction. She was done fighting. These children were her responsibility now, and she would not abandon them to chase after revenge or justice or whatever noble cause the party thought justified risking their lives. Then Kefka's light of judgment struck Moblis. The beam came without warning, as it always did, slamming into the village and causing devastation. Buildings collapsed, fires erupted, and the children screamed in terror. Terra tried to protect them with her remaining magic, but it was not enough. As she struggled to save the children from the collapsing structures, as she realized that hiding from the fight had not kept them safe, something inside her finally broke through the fear and self-doubt. Her Esper form erupted in a blaze of light. The transformation she had feared and suppressed for so long became her salvation and theirs. In her Esper form, Terra was powerful enough to shield the children, to drive back the monsters attracted by the light of judgment, to save everyone who depended on her. When the dust settled and she transformed back, understanding flooded through her. She could not protect these children by hiding. The only way to keep them safe was to stop Kefka, to end his reign of terror once and for all. Terra rejoined the party, not as a reluctant weapon, but as a willing warrior fighting for something she believed in. The children would be cared for by the adult survivors in Moblis, and when this was over, when Kefka was defeated, she would return to them. But first, she had to ensure there would be a world for them to grow up in. With most of the party reunited, their attention turned to the other threats that plagued the world of ruin. The 8 legendary dragons, powerful creatures infused with the Warring Triad's magic during the Cataclysm, terrorized different regions. Each dragon was a force of nature, capable of devastating entire towns. The party hunted them down one by one. Blue Dragon in the ancient castle, Red Dragon in the Phoenix Cave. Each battle testing them, forcing them to become stronger. The dragons were not simply monsters to be defeated, but guardians of powerful magicite, the crystallized essences of Espers who had died in the Cataclysm. Each dragon they defeated yielded another piece of magical knowledge, another way to harness the power that Kefka had used to destroy the world. It was a grim irony that they needed to master magic to defeat the god of magic, but they had no other choice. Conventional weapons would not be enough. They revisited old locations, now twisted by the Cataclysm into new horrors. The opera house still stood, but the cultured audience was gone, replaced by people who had lost everything and turned to the opera as a reminder of what civilization had been. The Colosseum offered battles against legendary opponents, a place where warriors could test themselves and claim powerful weapons. Everywhere they went, they found echoes of the world that was ghosts and memories of what had been lost. Strago and Realm had survived as well, though their reunion with the party was complicated by Strago's membership in a cult of Kefka worshippers. The old man had been brainwashed, convinced that Kefka was a god who deserved devotion rather than defiance. The cult like many desperate groups in the world of ruin, had mistaken power for divinity, had decided that if they could not defeat Kefka, they should worship him instead. It took the combined efforts of the party and realm's tearful pleading to break through Strago's indoctrination and remind him of who he truly was. Gogo, a mysterious mime whose entire identity was based on imitating others, joined their cause as well. No one knew who Gogo truly was beneath the layers of costume and mimicry, and Gogo seemed content to keep it that way. Umaro, a Sasquatch from the frozen north, was recruited through a combination of combat and diplomacy, his incredible strength adding to their growing power. Each new member brought unique abilities, unique perspectives on the dying world. The party also dealt with the personal demons that haunted several of its members. They helped Tyan reconnect with his samurai heritage, helped Shadow confront his past as Clyde, a train robber who had abandoned his partner and fled from responsibility. They discovered Shadow's connection to Realm, the heavily implied truth that he was her father, though this revelation was handled with subtlety and never explicitly confirmed. Every character who had survived carried scars, physical and psychological, from the cataclysm and from the lives they had led before it. As they grew stronger, as they gathered more magicite and learned more powerful spells, the party began to understand the true nature of what they faced. Kefka was no longer simply a man with magical abilities. He had absorbed the power of the warring triad, had become something that transcended mortality. He existed in a state between physical and metaphysical, a being of pure magical energy given form by madness and nihilism. To defeat him, they would need to reach his tower and climb to its summit, fighting through legions of monsters and the very architecture of destruction itself. Kefka's tower rose from the center of what had once been Vector, a massive structure of twisted metal and stone held together by magical energy. It defied conventional architecture, with sections that seemed to float independent of support, stairs that led nowhere, and rooms that shifted and changed without warning. The tower was a physical manifestation of Kefka's mind, chaotic and hostile, designed to kill anyone who dared approach. The assault on Kefka's tower required dividing the party into 3 separate groups. The tower's structure forced this division, with multiple paths that needed to be followed simultaneously, switches that required cooperation between distant parties, and enemies that could only be defeated through coordinated effort. It was a final test of everything they had learned, every bond they had formed, every strategy they had developed throughout their long journey. The battles within the tower were brutal. They fought through reconstructed versions of the Empire's greatest weapons, faced the ghosts of enemies they had defeated before, encountered the spirits of Espers who had died and been transformed into something twisted by Kefka's power. Each floor brought new horrors, new challenges designed to break their will and prove that resistance was futile. But the party pressed on, driven by the memory of everyone who had died, by the hope that the children in Moblise and the survivors scattered across the world deserved better than to live under a mad god's whim. Near the tower's summit, they encountered the statues themselves. The warring triad, or at least the shells that remained of them, attacked in sequence. The demon statue, the goddess statue, and the machine statue each represented a different aspect of divine power. Each wielded abilities that pushed the party to their absolute limits. These were the gods who had created magic, whose war had nearly destroyed the world 1,000 years ago, and now they served as Kefka's final guardians. The battles against the statues were wars of attrition. Each form had to be carefully balanced in terms of damage, as destroying one statue while the others remained could trigger a catastrophic release of magical energy that would wipe out the entire party. They had to fight all three simultaneously, coordinating attacks across the different groups, timing their strikes so that all three statues fell within moments of each other. It required perfect execution, absolute trust, and a level of tactical coordination they had never before achieved. When the statues finally fell, the path to Kefka opened. The party reunited at the tower's peak, standing before a door that pulsed with malevolent energy. Beyond that door lay the god of magic, the being who had ended the world, who had killed billions in a moment of spite and madness. There was no guarantee they would survive the encounter, no certainty that even their combined strength would be enough. But they had come too far to turn back now. They opened the door and stepped into Kefka's presence. The chamber at the tower's peak was vast and impossible, a space that seemed to exist outside normal reality. The walls shifted through colors that had no names. The floor appeared solid, but felt like walking on thoughts. And at the center of it all stood Kefka Palazzo, or what he had become. His jester's costume had been replaced by robes of divine authority. His painted face now a mask that seemed to shift between expressions without moving. Energy crackled around him, the raw power of magic made visible. Kefka greeted them with a laugh, that same unsettling cackle that had haunted them throughout their journey. He mocked their determination, their hope, their belief that they could change anything. He spoke philosophy, not in the measured tones of a scholar, but in the manic rambling of someone who had glimpsed the truth of existence and found it hilarious. Life had no meaning, he declared. Love was an illusion, hope a lie, struggle pointless, because death came for everyone eventually. Why prolong the suffering? Why not embrace the void? The party answered not with words but with action. They had no grand philosophical rebuttal, no eloquent speech about the meaning of life. They simply refused to accept Kefka's worldview, refused to believe that suffering erased joy, or that death invalidated the value of having lived. They had found each other in the ruins of the world. They had built hope from ash and despair. That was answer enough. The battle against Kefka occurred across multiple phases, each representing a different aspect of his divine power. First, they fought through his cultist followers, the people who had given themselves over to worship of destruction. Then they faced Kefka's demonic visage, a twisted representation of the madness that consumed him. Each form was more powerful than the last. Each tested different aspects of the party's capabilities. The fight was unlike anything they had experienced before. Kefka wielded the full power of the warring triad, casting spells that reshaped the battlefield, summoning waves of monsters from nothing, healing himself through pure magical force. His light of judgment, the attack that had terrorized the world of ruin for a year, struck with devastating frequency. Party members fell and had to be revived. Resources were depleted and had to be carefully managed. And through it all, Kefka laughed. But something began to change as the battle progressed. Kefka's laughter took on a desperate edge. His attacks became more frantic, more aggressive. For all his talk of the meaninglessness of existence, he was fighting desperately to preserve his own. The party recognized the hypocrisy, the fundamental contradiction at the heart of his philosophy. If life truly meant nothing, why did he cling to his own so fiercely? Terra transformed into her Esper form, wings spreading wide, her power fully unleashed. Celes channeled her magitech abilities, the magic that had been forced into her now wielded as a weapon of her own choice. Locke struck with the weapons he had treasure hunted across the world. Sabin unleashed his martial arts techniques, physical power enhanced by the discipline of a lifetime. Edgar deployed his tools and machines, human ingenuity standing against divine might. Sion's blade sang with the spirits of Doma, every strike an act of vengeance and justice. Each member of the party contributed their unique strengths, their individual stories converging into a single moment of defiance. Kefka's final form emerged, a grotesque angelic figure that towered over them, wielding power that could unmake reality itself. This was the god of magic in his truest manifestation, divinity twisted by madness into something that could only destroy. The chamber filled with light and chaos, magic so dense it became visible, the very air screaming with energy. The party fought with everything they had, burning through their remaining items, their last reserves of strength, their final reserves of hope. And then, impossibly, Kefka fell. The god of magic, the being who had destroyed the world, collapsed under the combined assault of those who refused to accept his nihilism. His form began to dissolve, the power of the warring triad that had sustained him unraveling. He screamed in denial, unable to comprehend his defeat. In his final moments, he railed against the injustice of it all, the absurdity that these fragile mortals had overcome a god. But as Kefka died, so too did magic itself. The warring triad's power, freed from Kefka's control, began to dissipate into nothingness. Magic had brought the world nothing but pain, from the original War of the Gods, to the War of the Magi, to the Magitech experiments, and finally to the Cataclysm. With Kefka's death, magic recognized its own toxicity and chose to leave the world forever. This meant the Espers, beings made of pure magic, could no longer exist. Terra, half Esper herself, felt the change immediately. Her Esper form began to fade, the power that had been part of her identity since birth slowly disappearing. She had known this might happen, had understood that defeating Kefka might mean losing part of herself. But she had made the choice anyway, had decided that the world's survival mattered more than preserving her own abilities. Kefka's tower began to collapse around them. Without the magical energy holding it together, the impossible structure started to obey the laws of physics it had defied for so long. Sections of the tower fell away, crashing to the earth far below. The party ran, racing against the disintegration, fighting through falling debris and monsters that had lost their master and their purpose. The tower groaned and shuddered, every moment threatening to be their last. Terra's transformation became more pronounced as they fled. Her Esper features faded, her wings dissolved, the magical aura that had always surrounded her dimmed and disappeared. She stumbled, weak from the loss of so much of what she had been, but her friends caught her. Locke and Edgar supported her between them, refusing to leave her behind, refusing to let her sacrifice be in vain. They would all escape together, or not at all. The escape from the collapsing tower was a desperate race against time and entropy. Rubble fell from above, floors gave way beneath their feet, and the magical energy that had suffused every stone now backlashed in unpredictable ways. Explosions rocked the structure, rooms filled with poison gas, and the very air seemed to burn with the death throes of magic itself. But the party had survived too much, fought too hard, to die in the tower's collapse. They reached the tower's base and ran into the wasteland beyond, the Falcon waiting where Setzer had positioned it. The airship's engines roared to life as they scrambled aboard, Setzer not waiting for everyone to be seated before taking off. The Falcon climbed into the blood-red sky, gaining altitude and distance as Kefka's tower finally completed its collapse. The massive structure imploded, falling in on itself, and where it had stood there was now only a cloud of dust and rubble. From the Falcon's deck, the party watched as magic left the world. It was not a dramatic event, but a quiet one, a gentle fading like the last light of sunset. The red sky began to clear, the poison clouds dissipating. The magical radiation that had choked the atmosphere for a year started to break down and vanish. It would take time for the world to fully heal, but the process had begun. The survivors would have to rebuild without magic, relying on human ingenuity and determination. It would be hard, but it would be possible. Terra stood at the railing, feeling the last of her Esper heritage fade away. She had been defined by this power for so long, had struggled with the question of whether she was human or Esper or something in between. Now that question had been answered definitively. She was human, fully and completely, no longer carrying the burden of divided heritage. It should have felt like a loss, like something precious had been taken from her. Instead, it felt like freedom. She smiled, and her friends smiled with her. They had survived the impossible, had defeated a god, had saved what remained of the world. The cost had been high, the scars would never fully heal, but they had won. Hope, which Kefka had declared a lie, had proven stronger than despair. Life, which he had declared meaningless, had found meaning in the connections between people, in the choice to keep fighting even when defeat seemed certain. The Falcon flew over the world of ruin, and from their vantage point, the party could see signs of recovery. Small settlements where survivors were rebuilding, fields where crops had been planted, roads being cleared of rubble. The world would never be what it was before the cataclysm, but that did not mean it had no future. People were resilient, capable of finding joy even in hardship, capable of creating new meaning from the ashes of the old. They flew over Mobli's, and Terra saw the children she had protected playing in the town square. They waved at the airship, perhaps recognizing it, perhaps simply happy to see something flying overhead that was not Kefka's light of judgment. Terra waved back, tears streaming down her face. She had saved them, had given them a chance to grow up, to have lives worth living. That was meaning enough. They flew over the ruins of Vector, where Kefka's tower had stood. The rubble was already being scavenged, people picking through the debris for anything useful, turning the monument to destruction into raw materials for reconstruction. The empire that had started it all was truly gone now, its capital reduced to recycled building materials, its legacy nothing but a cautionary tale for future generations. They flew over Figaro Castle, which Edgar had managed to reposition near its original location. The castle's flags flew proudly, a symbol that some things had survived intact, that some institutions remained to help guide the rebuilding. Edgar spoke of opening the castle to refugees, of using its resources to help survivors establish new settlements, of turning a symbol of monarchy into a tool for collective recovery. They flew over Doma, or what remained of it. Kyan stood at the railing, looking down at the castle where his family had died, where Kefka's poison had ended so many innocent lives. The castle was just ruins now, but Kyan's expression was not one of grief. He had made peace with his loss, had learned to carry his memories without being crushed by them. He would rebuild, would honor the dead, by helping create a world they would have been proud of. Setzer kept the Falcon airborne, not ready to land, not ready to let the moment end. They had been through so much together, this collection of people who had been strangers when the journey began. A treasure hunter, an imperial general, a king, a martial artist, a samurai, a feral child, a mercenary, a gambler, an opera singer, an elderly mage, a young artist, and a woman caught between two worlds. They had saved each other as much as they had saved the world. As the falcon flew through skies that were slowly returning to blue, as magic faded from existence and humanity faced a future without the divine or the supernatural, Final Fantasy VI asked its players one last question. Not whether evil could be defeated or whether hope could triumph, but whether life had meaning even in the absence of certainty, whether existence itself was worthwhile even when suffering was guaranteed. The game answered that question through its characters' choices. Terra chose to protect the children even after losing her power. Locke chose to let Rachel go and open his heart to Celes. Edgar chose to use his position to help others rather than preserve his own comfort. Sabine chose to be strong for those who could not protect themselves. Tyann chose to honor his family's memory by living fully. Celes chose to keep fighting even after trying to die. Every character, in their own way, declared that yes, life was worth living. That meaning was not something given from above, but something created through action and connection. Kefka had been wrong. Life was not meaningless, and hope was not a lie. They were difficult truths rather than easy ones, truths that required constant renewal and recommitment, but they were true nonetheless. The world of ruin would become something new, not a return to what was, but a forward movement into what could be. The survivors would grieve what they had lost while building what could yet be created. The falcon continued its flight as the sun began to set, the first truly natural sunset in over a year. The sky turned orange and purple, colors unfiltered by magical pollution, and the party watched in silence as beauty returned to a world that had known only ugliness for so long. They had won not just a battle, but the right to try again, the opportunity to create a future worth inhabiting. As the credits rolled and the music swelled, Final Fantasy VI delivered its final message. It was not a message of easy triumph or perfect resolution. Characters were scarred, the world was broken, and magic's departure meant losing abilities that had defined some of them. But they were alive, together, and determined to make that life mean something. In a medium often criticized for shallow narratives and simple morality, Final Fantasy VI offered something rarer and more valuable. A story that acknowledged darkness while refusing to be consumed by it, that faced nihilism and rejected it not through argument, but through the simple act of choosing to continue. The game ended not with certainty, but with possibility. The Falcon flew on, carrying its passengers toward an uncertain future, and that uncertainty was not presented as a flaw, but as an opportunity. They would rebuild, they would remember, they would create new stories in the ruins of the old, and that would be enough. Final Fantasy VI's story resonates because it understands that hope is not the belief that everything will be fine. Hope is the choice to act as if effort matters even when outcome is uncertain. It is the decision to protect what can be protected, to fight what can be fought, and to accept that we cannot control everything while refusing to let that powerlessness paralyze us. Every character in the game embodies this active, engaged hope, this rejection of both naive optimism and cynical despair in favor of determined pragmatism. The game's ending is bittersweet by design. Magic's departure robs Terra of part of her identity, means the Espers are truly gone, eliminates abilities the party had relied upon, but it also means no more Magitech experiments, no more weapons of mass destruction, no more gods warping reality according to their whims. The world becomes smaller, but also safer. more predictable, but also more amenable to human flourishing. It is a trade worth making, and the characters make it willingly even as they mourn what is lost. This willingness to portray heroism as difficult, costly, and uncertain rather than glorious and triumphant is what makes Final Fantasy VI's narrative so powerful decades after its release. The heroes win, but they pay for that victory with scars, physical and psychological. The world is saved, but it remains broken in ways that will take generations to heal. The villain is defeated, but his philosophy lingers, a question that each character must answer for themselves through how they choose to live. In the end, Final Fantasy VI is a story about choosing to matter in a universe that does not care whether you do. It is about creating meaning in the absence of cosmic purpose, about finding reasons to continue when continuation is difficult. It is about people who look at a ruined world and decide that ruin is not the end of the story, but merely the end of a chapter. And in telling that story with such care, such attention to character and theme, such willingness to let its heroes suffer and struggle and choose anyway, it created one of gaming's most enduring narratives. The legacy of Final Fantasy VI extends far beyond its immediate impact in 1994. It influenced countless games that followed, demonstrating that video game narratives could tackle complex themes without sacrificing entertainment value. It showed that ensemble casts could work in RPGs if each character received adequate development. It proved that letting the villain win halfway through could create narrative stakes that resonated emotionally rather than just mechanically. It established many of the storytelling conventions that modern JRPGs still employ, from character-specific side quests to multi-phase final bosses, to endings that prioritize theme over spectacle. But more than its mechanical or structural innovations, Final Fantasy VI succeeded because it trusted its players. It trusted them to sit with discomfort, to accept ambiguity, to engage with questions that had no easy answers. It did not condescend or simplify, did not offer false comfort or easy solutions. It presented a world that ended and asked what comes after, presented characters who suffered and asked how they could heal, presented a villain who believed life was meaningless and asked players to prove him wrong, not through argument, but through demonstration. That trust, that respect for the intelligence and emotional capacity of its audience, is perhaps Final Fantasy VI's greatest achievement. In a medium often dismissed as juvenile or escapist, it created a work of genuine artistic merit, a narrative that could stand alongside the best literature in its exploration of what it means to be human, to suffer, to hope, and to choose to matter despite everything that suggests we do not. It took the tools of fantasy, of magic and monsters and world-ending catastrophes, and used them to tell a deeply human story about resilience, community, and the stubborn refusal to accept despair as the final word. 28 years after its release, Final Fantasy VI remains relevant because the questions it asks remain unanswered. We still struggle with meaning in an indifferent universe, still fight against forces that seem overwhelming, still search for reasons to hope when evidence suggests hope is foolish. The game does not provide solutions to these struggles, but it provides something perhaps more valuable. The example of characters who face the same struggles and choose, again and again, to continue. Their fictional victories cannot solve our real problems, but they can remind us that the choice to keep fighting is itself meaningful, that solidarity in struggle creates bonds that justify the struggle itself. The story of Final Fantasy VI is ultimately a story about stories, about why we tell them and why they matter. In a world without magic, without gods, without cosmic purpose, What remains is the stories we tell each other about who we are and who we might become. The game's characters become heroes not because destiny chose them or prophecy foretold them, but because they chose to be heroes, chose to protect others, chose to make their actions mean something even in the absence of any guarantee that meaning would last. As the Falcon flies off into the sunset, carrying its passengers toward an unknown future, Final Fantasy VI leaves us with an invitation rather than a conclusion. It invites us to make the same choices its characters made, to create meaning through action, to find purpose in protection, to declare through how we live that existence is worthwhile even when it is difficult. It does not promise that making these choices will be easy or that the results will always justify the effort. It simply shows us people who made those choices anyway, and in doing so, suggests that we might do the same. That is the complete story of Final Fantasy VI, a tale of a world that ended, of people who survived, and of the choice to believe that survival was enough to build on. It is a story about fighting impossible odds, not because victory is certain, but because the alternative is to surrender before the battle begins. It is about looking at ruins and seeing not just what was destroyed, but what might yet be built. And it is about recognizing that even in a world without magic, without gods, without easy answers, we still have each other, and sometimes that is enough. The game's final image, the Falcon flying away as magic dissolves into nothingness and humanity faces its future alone, encapsulates everything the story has been building toward. It is an ending that acknowledges loss while embracing possibility, that grieves what cannot be recovered while celebrating what remains. The characters aboard that airship have been fundamentally changed by their experiences, marked by trauma and loss and the weight of choices made in impossible circumstances. But they are still there, still together, still moving forward. And in a story that has explored the darkest questions about existence and meaning, that simple fact of continued motion becomes its own form of triumph. Final Fantasy VI does not ask us to ignore darkness or pretend suffering does not exist. It asks us to acknowledge both while refusing to let them define us. It presents a world where terrible things happen, where good people die, where effort does not guarantee success, and where even victory comes at tremendous cost. And having presented all of that with unflinching honesty, it then asks, what now? How do we live in such a world? What choices do we make when no choice seems adequate? The answer, delivered through 13 distinct characters and their intersecting stories, is that we live by choosing to. We make the inadequate choices because the alternative is to make no choice at all. We protect what can be protected, fight what can be fought, and mourn what cannot be saved while refusing to let that mourning paralyze us. We find meaning not in cosmic purpose, but in the connections between people, in the small acts of kindness and the large acts of courage, in the decision to care about something beyond our own survival. This is why Final Fantasy VI endures when other games from its era have faded into obscurity. Its graphics, though charming, have been surpassed. Its mechanics, though solid, have been refined by successors. Its production values, impressive for 1994, seem quaint compared to modern standards. What remains timeless is its willingness to engage honestly with difficult questions, to present complex characters facing impossible choices, to build a narrative that trusts its audience to sit with discomfort and ambiguity without demanding easy resolution. The game's story is complete, but its questions remain open. Each player must answer for themselves whether they agree with the game's implied thesis, whether they believe hope and meaning can be created through choice and action, whether they think the struggle is worthwhile even when outcome is uncertain. Final Fantasy VI does not force its philosophy on anyone, but it presents that philosophy through characters who embody it so fully, so believably, that even skeptical players find themselves moved. And so the Falcon flies on, carrying heroes toward a future they will have to build with their own hands, in a world that will offer no magical solutions or divine interventions. They have only each other, their experiences, their choices, and the determination to make those things enough. The camera pulls back, the music swells one final time, and the story of Final Fantasy VI ends not with a period, but with an ellipsis, a suggestion that though this tale is told, the lives it depicted continue beyond our sight. It is an ending that honors everything that came before, while refusing to pretend that endings are ever truly final. Life continues, scarred but persistent, and in that continuation, in that stubborn refusal to let catastrophe be the last word, we find the game's ultimate message, that meaning is not discovered but created, not given but earned, not guaranteed but possible. And possibility, in a world that offered only despair, might be the greatest magic of all.